I'm Emily Rooney. Welcome to Beat the Press. Our topics: protesters call for WGBH to remove David Koch from its board of trustees because of his views on climate change. Did the NFL pressure ESPN to back out of its partnership on Frontline's League of Denial? Should news organizations stop using the term Obamacare? And our panel rants and raves of the week. Joining me are Dan Kennedy of Northeastern University, WGBH's Kelly Crossley, Tom Fiedler of Boston University, and George Donnelly of the Boston Business Journal. First, PBS and the science program NOVA, produced here at WGBH, have received millions of dollars from businessman and philanthropist David Koch. He also donates money to organizations that debunk global warming. Now an organization called Forecast the Facts claims WGBH is tarnishing its image by allowing David Koch to sit on its board. A small but well-organized protest outside the WGBH studios this week called on the station to drop billionaire businessman David Koch from its board of trustees.
David H. Koch is a carbon pollution billionaire who's one of the people who's most responsible for the denial of climate change in the United States and the entire world. And his mission in life is really incompatible with that of WGBH in terms of informing the public. WGBH should do the right thing and remove David Koch from the board.
Since 1982, David Koch has given $18.6 million to WGBH, $10 million of that directly to NOVA. But Koch made much of his fortune by investing in fossil fuels, and he's also donated millions to organizations that question climate change. And that raises questions about WGBH, say protesters.
I think it's really up to the viewers and of the people at NOVA to wonder really whether that money has had no influence. It's really hard. There's a really troubling appearance of a conflict of interest.
WGBH spokesman Michael Reyes says he can assure viewers that Koch's money has no sway over the content of any programs on WGBH.
WGBH board members and trustees don't have any editorial control over anything that WGBH puts out. NOVA's independence is forefront, and the same goes with Frontline and the other reporting that you do on WGBH News and that all your colleagues in the WGBH Newsroom perform.
Since 2000, WGBH has produced 12 films on climate change, 9 of them by NOVA, many of which bear Koch's name as a grantor. And while NOVA pulls no punches about climate change, it's fair to say that crediting a donor who supports organizations that deny global warming is awkward at best. Well, first of all, I want to say, through all my research, I couldn't find anything that David Koch said that was a direct denial of climate change. He has made some flip comments, but he hasn't said, I don't believe it, it's not happening. But he has supported organizations that deny certain aspects of it. And he also tried to stop legislation that there was climate change policy on Capitol Hill. He supported organizations that were doing that. And he has, in fact, in the past, exacted revenge. And WNET was supposed to run a documentary called Citizen Koch about him. But they had aired another documentary that focused on his snazzy Park Street apartment. He got very annoyed about that and pulled the backing for this Citizen Koch documentary, and he pulled funding for his own. He usually gives $1 million to NET. So it's not like he hasn't exacted revenge in the past. So I can understand why WGBH might be a little reluctant to ask him to step down.
You know, I am not very supportive of the idea that anybody who's giving money to any organization ought to be subjected to some sort of political litmus test. David Koch apparently has managed to stay out of the affairs of NOVA and some of these other shows and continue to give them millions of dollars despite what may be his own views on climate change. The examples you cite, I guess he doesn't deserve a good conduct medal for all of that. But the fact is, those were programs about him. I haven't seen any evidence that he interferes with programming that isn't about him directly, even if it expresses views that he disagrees with. I'm not crazy about boycotts of stores either. I mean, you know, let people live their lives, and I think it's incumbent upon WGBH and other organizations that accept money from him to live up to their pledge that they're not going to let him interfere with programming. But as long as those lines are respected, I don't really have any trouble with it.
I share that view. I think the idea of having litmus test for donors is troubling just to begin with, because you'd have to have a litmus test for everybody on every issue that may be covered by NOVA. Who is that, the great Speaker of the House in California who had the line that if you can't take a lobbyist's money, drink their whiskey and sleep with their women and vote against them in the morning, you shouldn't be in politics? In some ways, I think in any kind of organization that depends on getting donations, you've got to sometimes hold your nose, take the donation, but then do what is right for the organization. And basically, that's the way it ought to be. As long as there's transparency on who the donor is and where the money is going, I think that's where it ends.
I think it's interesting that the day of the boycott, that night, the NOVA was really a very intense climate change piece. So I think what they're saying is that they don't like the appearance of the potential of conflict of interest. And I get that totally. It does not look good falling on the heels of what happened at WNET. But to your point, that was about him. And if I have a lot of money and I don't want you doing something about me, I guess I can take my money back if I want to, because I don't appreciate that. But with broader subjects and with, the fine presentations that NOVA does, and, the one thing that is always said about NOVA is how very clear, how very scientific, how very evidence-based those programs are. So the minute anybody sees them not being that, there could be some suspicion. But to your point, it could also happen because of other donors there. I think the transparency is more than something that has to be, it really has to be really, really strong, because there is a perception of conflict here. And we'll see what happens down the road.
I think the issue is it's a science program.
Exactly.
This is somebody who is skeptical of certain aspects of proven science.
I don't know what organizations do that depend on donations. Yeah. So that's going to be
donations is one thing. He's a grantor. I hope that's the proper term. He underwrites the program, which is different than being a donor to PBS.
Right.
His name is on the program.
Exactly. So as I said, they just have to have a very bright line, as often happens.
I don't know.
What surprised me a little bit about the coverage that I've seen is one thing is that he has been on the GBH board since 1997, right? So, so the timing of it is a little strange to me. The other thing, the other part of the coverage that seemed to be missing a little bit is the board chair, Amos Hostetter, who's very wealthy from the cable industry. Yeah. He actually happens to be the Boston area is one of its leading people behind starting climate change initiatives in the city of Boston, the Green Ribbon Commission, for example. And so on the board itself, you have this this balance, and it's just in some ways the timing of it is odd. I just don't know.
I don't think anybody ever shows up for those meetings anyway. So
well, I got to say, I didn't know he was on the board until recently. I got to say one thing to Dan. I believe in the boycott. I think people should be out there expressing it. Often because of that and that kind of advocacy, you learn some things you didn't know. So I just didn't want anybody to think I wasn't believing in the boycott, because I do.
I certainly believe in their right to speak out. And I'll listen.